Are
She
you
was a
okay,
powerful
miss?
CEO brought to her knees by fear, and he was a struggling single dad with nothing left to lose. But when their worlds collided, what happened next would change both of their lives forever. Stay till the end, because this story proves that true strength is born from kindness. Rain slashed against the windshield as the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red. The wipers struggled to keep up, squealing across the glass in a rhythm that matched the pounding of Clara Mitchell's heart. She was gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her phone on the passenger seat blinked with missed calls, dozens of them, from her company's board members, investors, and one name she wished she'd never seen again, Michael. Michael had been her business partner, the man she'd trusted for nearly 10 years, the man who once told her that they could conquer the world together. And now he was the same man who had stabbed her in the back, selling her company's secrets to competitors, manipulating board members to vote her out, and leaving her reputation hanging by a thread. Her voice cracked as she whispered to herself, "How could he?" The rain answered her with a deafening roar. She pressed her foot harder on the accelerator, wanting nothing more than to leave the glittering cityscape behind. Her reflection in the rearview mirror showed a woman she barely recognized, her dark hair messy and damp, mascara smudged beneath tired eyes that had seen too many battles. The GPS voice droned mechanically. "In 500 meters, turn right." She ignored it. Clara didn't care where she was going. All she knew was that she needed to escape from her company, her betrayal, her name. Everything she'd built had come crashing down, and for the first time in her 35 years, she felt completely, utterly alone. Lightning flashed, and in that instant of blinding light, she saw her father's face in her memory, his kind smile the day she started her company. "Remember, Clara," he had said, "no matter how high you rise, always be kind. Because one day, kindness is what will save you." She let out a shaky breath, the irony of those words cutting deep. What had kindness brought her? In her world of ruthless deals and polished lies, kindness had been a weakness. And now it was too late to change that. The road curved sharply and the rain intensified. Her car's tires hissed on the slick asphalt. She turned on the headlights to full beam and squinted through the downpour. Then out of nowhere a deer darted across the road. "Ah!" she gasped, jerking the wheel instinctively. The car swerved violently, skidding off the main road. The tires lost grip, spinning helplessly before the vehicle crashed into a roadside ditch. The world exploded in sound, metal twisting, glass shattering, the sickening crunch of impact. Then silence. For a few seconds, Clara couldn't breathe. The smell of gasoline filled her nostrils. The airbag had deployed, pressing against her chest, and she felt a sharp pain in her legs. She tried to move, but nothing happened. Panic seized her. She looked down and saw her left leg pinned awkwardly beneath the crushed dashboard. "No, no, no, no," she whispered frantically. Her hands trembled as she tried to push the metal away, but it wouldn't budge. Her body began to shake, and tears mixed with the rainwater dripping through the cracked window. She reached for her phone, but it was gone, thrown somewhere in the chaos. The darkness around her seemed to close in, the only sound the relentless drumming of rain on metal. The temperature was dropping fast, and a shiver ran through her body. Clara had faced corporate storms, courtroom battles, and public humiliation, but nothing like this. Alone, injured, and helpless, she realized just how fragile her power had always been. Her eyes fluttered, exhaustion threatening to pull her under. Then she heard it, the faint sound of an engine approaching. Headlights appeared through the fog and rain. A pickup truck slowed near the wreckage. For a moment, fear stabbed her chest. What if it wasn't help? What if it was someone dangerous? She'd read too many stories about people disappearing on empty highways. Her heart thudded painfully. The driver's door opened, and a tall figure stepped out, his boots splashing through puddles. "Hey, can you hear me?" The voice was deep but kind, carried by the rain. Clara's throat tightened. She couldn't tell if she should trust him. "Please don't hurt me. I can't walk," she cried out weakly, tears welling again. The man stopped a few feet away and lifted both hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you. My name's Daniel. You've been in an accident. I just want to help. Something in his tone, steady, calm, sincere, made her believe him. He moved closer, crouched beside the shattered door and peered in. His brown eyes softened when he saw her condition. "You're lucky to be alive," he said gently. He ran back to his truck and grabbed a crowbar and flashlight. Within moments, he was prying open the mangled door. "This might hurt a little," he warned. She nodded, biting her lip to stifle a groan as he forced the metal away from her leg. When the door finally gave way, he reached in and carefully unbuckled her seatbelt. The moment his arms slipped under her, Clara realized how exhausted she was. He lifted her effortlessly, shielding her from the rain with his body as he carried her to his truck. The warmth of his flannel shirt and the sound of his heartbeat close to her ear made her feel safe. A strange feeling for someone who had trusted no one for years. He set her gently in the passenger seat and wrapped his jacket around her shoulders. The fabric smelled faintly of engine oil and pine, oddly comforting. She looked at him, shivering. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. He smiled, a soft, humble curve of his lips. "Because if I were you, I'd hope someone would stop." The drive to the hospital was silent, except for the patter of rain and the faint hum of the heater. Clara watched him from the corner of her eye. His face was lined with fatigue, but there was something steady about him, something grounded, like he had seen life's worst and learned to live with it. "Where were you headed?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Home," he said simply. "Late shift at the garage. My little girl's probably already asleep. A mechanic," she thought. The calluses on his hands made sense now. He wasn't from her world of polished suits and designer watches, yet he carried a quiet dignity that some billionaires lacked. As they neared the hospital, Clara's eyes grew heavy. The warmth of the truck, the rhythm of the rain, and the exhaustion of the night lulled her toward sleep. She murmured faintly, "Thank you, Daniel." Before drifting off, he looked over at her, concern in his eyes. "Hang in there, okay? You're gonna be fine." When they arrived, Daniel rushed into the emergency room, shouting for help. Nurses hurried out with a stretcher. As they wheeled her inside, one of them asked, "Are you family?" Daniel hesitated, glancing at Clara's pale face. "No," he said quietly. "Just someone who couldn't drive past." Hours later, after the doctors confirmed she was stable, Daniel sat in the waiting room, soaked and shivering, his jacket still wrapped around her. He could have left then. He'd done his part. But something in his heart told him to stay. He watched the rain outside the glass doors and thought of his daughter sleeping soundly at home. He imagined if she had been in an accident, alone and afraid, and how he'd pray for someone to help her too. So he stayed, through the night and into the dawn, and when Clara Mitchell finally opened her eyes 2 days later, the first thing she saw wasn't a doctor or a nurse. It was Daniel Hayes, sitting by her bedside, head bowed in sleep, the man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. And for the first time in years, the powerful CEO who believed kindness was weakness realized that maybe, just maybe, it was her greatest strength. The steady beep of a heart monitor echoed softly through the hospital room as Clara opened her eyes. For a moment she couldn't tell where she was. The white walls, the faint smell of antiseptic, the slow drip of an IV line, it all felt distant, like she was still trapped somewhere between dreaming and reality. Her body ached all over, but it was her legs that frightened her most. They felt heavy, almost disconnected from the rest of her. She tried to move them but failed. Panic set in. Her hands gripped the bedsheet tightly as memories from the accident flooded back. The rain, the screech of tires, the voice of the man who carried her, the warmth of his jacket around her shoulders. She blinked hard, trying to steady her breathing. A nurse entered the room, smiling softly. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell. You're awake." "That's a good sign." Clara's voice was hoarse. "How long have I been here?" 2 days, the nurse replied gently, checking the monitors. "You've suffered some trauma to your lower spine, but the doctors believe it's temporary. With rest and therapy, you should recover movement in time." "Temporary," Clara repeated almost to herself. The word didn't comfort her as much as it should have. She had spent her whole life in control, of her company, of her future, of everything. Now even her own body refused to obey her. She looked at the nurse, her eyes filled with worry. "There was a man, the one who helped me. Is he—" The nurse smiled knowingly. "Mr. Hayes. Yes, he's still here. Hasn't left your side since they brought you in." Clara's lips parted in disbelief. "He's still here?" The nurse nodded. "He insisted. Said he'd wait until you woke up." A strange warmth spread through Clara's chest, something she couldn't quite explain. People in her world didn't do things like that. They stayed if it benefited them, not out of kindness. "Can I see him?" she asked quietly. A few minutes later, the door creaked open. Daniel stepped in hesitantly, wearing the same flannel shirt she remembered, though now it looked even more worn. His eyes were tired, and his hair slightly messy, but when he saw her awake, relief spread across his face. "You gave everyone quite a scare," he said with a small smile. "Glad to see you awake." Clara's throat tightened. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said softly. "You saved my life." Daniel shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone would have done." But Clara knew that wasn't true. She'd seen how most people acted when kindness required effort. In the corporate world, compassion was rare. In her life, it was almost non-existent. She looked at him closely. His rough hands, his plain clothes, his eyes that held quiet decency, and realized he was nothing like the people she surrounded herself with. They talked for a while. Clara learned that Daniel was a mechanic who owned a small repair shop on the edge of town. He had a daughter, Lily, 8 years old. His wife had passed away 4 years ago, leaving him to raise his little girl alone. "She's my whole world," he said, his voice softening when he mentioned her. "Everything I do is for her." Clara found herself listening intently, even smiling once or twice, something she hadn't done genuinely in a long time. "You must be a good father," she said quietly. He chuckled. "I try. I burn toast more often than I fix cars these days, but she hasn't fired me yet." For the first time, Clara laughed, a real unguarded laugh that made Daniel grin. It was the kind of moment that warmed the sterile hospital room. Over the next few days, Daniel kept visiting. Sometimes he brought her coffee from the small cafe across the street. Other times, he just sat nearby, reading the newspaper or telling her funny stories about his daughter. The nurses adored him. Even the doctors commented on his dedication. "Why are you still here?" Clara asked him one morning when he arrived earlier than usual. Most people would have moved on. Daniel shrugged, leaning back in the chair. "I figured you might need someone to talk to. Hospitals can feel like cages." She looked down at her hands. "You barely know me." He smiled gently. "Maybe I don't have to. You remind me of someone who once thought she had to carry the world alone." There was something in his tone, a quiet pain that told her there was a story behind those words. But she didn't ask. Not yet. When the doctors discussed her recovery plan, Clara learned she'd need weeks of physical therapy before she could walk again. The thought crushed her. "Weeks," she said under her breath. "I can't disappear for weeks. I have a company to run." Daniel, who was sitting nearby, spoke up. "Maybe that's the problem," he said softly. "You've been running everything but yourself." She turned her head sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means sometimes life makes a stop for a reason. Maybe it's time to let yourself rest," he said simply, then stood up to leave before she could respond. His words lingered long after he was gone. That evening, as she stared out the window at the grey sky, Clara's assistant called. The company was in chaos. Shareholders demanding answers, the media spinning stories about her absence. Clara listened silently, her heart sinking. For years, she had believed that her success defined her worth. But now, confined to a bed, she wondered what all that success was really worth if it couldn't buy her peace or love. The next morning, Daniel returned with a small container of homemade soup. "Brought something warm," he said, setting it on the table. Clara smiled faintly. "You really don't have to keep coming here." "Maybe I want to," he replied. She hesitated before saying, "You have a kind heart, Daniel. I don't meet many people like you." He looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "Kindness doesn't cost anything. My wife used to say that. She was the kind one. I just learned from her." Clara lowered her gaze. I wish I'd learned that lesson sooner. Daniel didn't push her to explain, but something in her voice made him stay a little longer that day. Later that week, when the doctors discussed discharging her, Clara felt a strange mix of relief and fear. She had nowhere to go. Her penthouse in the city was empty, cold, and full of memories of betrayal. Daniel must have noticed her hesitation because he asked, "You have someone to take care of you at home?" She shook her head. "No, it's just me." He nodded slowly, then said something unexpected. "I know this might sound crazy, but you could stay at my place for a while. It's quiet and my daughter would love the company. You'd have people around to help you until you're back on your feet." Clara blinked, stunned. "I can't impose like that." "You wouldn't be," Daniel said. "You helped me without knowing it." "How?" she asked, genuinely confused. He smiled. "Lily's been asking why people don't help each other anymore. Maybe this is how I show her they still do." Clara's eyes softened. She wanted to say no, to stay guarded like she always did. But something deep inside whispered that this might be what she needed. A place to breathe, people who didn't expect anything from her. After a long pause, she said quietly, "All right, just for a little while." Daniel grinned. "Good. I'll pick you up tomorrow." As he left the room, Clara leaned back against the pillow, feeling an unfamiliar sense of peace. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about business meetings, deadlines, or power struggles. She was thinking about the stranger who had risked his life to save her and was now offering her a home. That night, as she watched the rain through the hospital window, Clara realized something profound. Sometimes life had to break you to make you see the people who could put you back together. She closed her eyes, letting the sound of rain lull her to sleep. And when she dreamed, she didn't see the crash, the betrayal, or the boardroom. She saw a quiet man in a flannel shirt, holding out his hand, not for profit, not for power, but simply to help. And for the first time in her adult life, Clara Mitchell felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the thin white curtains of Daniel's small but cozy house. The sound of sizzling eggs came from the kitchen, along with the faint hum of an old radio playing a country tune. Clara sat awkwardly at the wooden dining table, her wheelchair positioned between a bookshelf and a potted plant. She looked around. The place was simple, a little messy, but filled with warmth. Children's drawings covered the fridge, some with stick figures labeled "Daddy and Me." There were traces of love in every corner, something she had never seen in her own sterile penthouse. Daniel entered from the kitchen, wearing a clean blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up. "Breakfast is ready," he said cheerfully, setting down a plate in front of her. "Hope you don't mind eggs and toast." "That's about all I've mastered." Clara gave a faint smile. "It's perfect." "Thank you." Before she could take a bite, a small figure rushed into the room, a little girl with curly brown hair and big hazel eyes. "Daddy, I can't find my shoes!" she exclaimed, then stopped abruptly when she saw Clara. "Oh, you're the lady from the hospital." Clara's lips curved into a soft smile. "You must be Lily." The girl nodded shyly. "Daddy said you were hurt, but you're getting better now." "That's right," Clara said gently. "Your dad's been taking good care of me." Lily looked proud. "He takes care of everyone, even our dog who eats his socks sometimes." Daniel groaned. "Lily." But Clara laughed, a sound so genuine it startled even her. It had been so long since laughter had come easily. As the days passed, Clara slowly adjusted to life in Daniel's home. She began to see how different their worlds were. Daniel's mornings started with making breakfast, packing Lily's lunch, and heading to his small garage for work. Clara, on the other hand, had spent the last decade waking up to emails, schedules, and corporate battles. It was strange, almost humbling, to watch a man live so simply yet so fully. One afternoon, while Daniel was at work and Lily was at school, Clara sat by the window in the living room, looking out at the quiet street. She held her tablet, scrolling through dozens of unread work messages. Her assistant had been handling things in her absence, but the company's tone had changed, board members growing restless, investors worried. Her temporary silence had turned into a storm of speculation. A message from her business partner Jason stood out. "Clara, the board is considering voting you out if you don't return soon. They're saying your recovery might be longer than expected. I'm trying to buy you time." Her chest tightened. She had built that company from nothing, sacrificed friendships, love, even her health. And now, while she sat here surrounded by warmth and kindness, the world she'd spent years constructing was slipping away. Daniel returned later that evening, his hands covered in grease, a tired smile on his face. "How was your day?" "Productive," Clara said softly, setting the tablet aside. "Your Wi-Fi is slow, by the way," he chuckled. "Yeah, it's one of those luxuries we don't splurge on. Priorities go to bills and birthday cakes." She looked at him for a long moment before asking, "Why do you do it?" "Work so hard, I mean. You could have an easier life if you left this town." Daniel leaned against the counter thinking, "Because my wife loved this town. We built our life here. Every corner reminds me of her, and Lily deserves to grow up with those memories." There was a silence that felt comfortable, like a shared understanding. Clara studied him, the quiet strength in his posture, the sincerity in his voice. He didn't chase money or power. He chased meaning. And that, she realized, was something she'd lost long ago. That weekend, Daniel suggested they all go to the park. "Fresh air will do you good," he said. "And Lily's been begging for a picnic." Clara hesitated. "I can't exactly run around the park, Daniel." "Then we'll bring the park to you," he replied, smiling. So they went. Daniel carried the picnic basket, Lily skipped ahead with a kite, and Clara rolled along the path, feeling the cool breeze on her face. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about deadlines or lawsuits, just the laughter of a child and the man who made her feel safe. They sat under a large oak tree. Lily chased butterflies, while Daniel handed Clara a sandwich. "You seem different lately," he said. "How so?" "Lighter," he replied. "When I first met you, you looked like someone carrying the world on her shoulders. You looked like someone learning to put it down." Clara's throat tightened. "I didn't realize how heavy it was until I stopped." Daniel nodded knowingly. "That's how life teaches us. Sometimes it forces us to slow down before we break completely." His words sank deep into her heart. She turned her gaze toward Lily, who was giggling as she tried to catch a kite's tail. "She's lucky to have you. She keeps me going," he said quietly. "After my wife passed, there were days I didn't want to get out of bed. But then Lily would come in, holding a drawing of the three of us, saying, 'Mommy says you have to smile today.'" He smiled sadly. "That's when I realized love doesn't end. It just changes." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. She reached out, touching his hand gently. "You're stronger than you think, Daniel." He looked at her, a flicker of warmth passing between them. "So are you." Days turned into weeks. Clara began physical therapy with Daniel's help. Every morning, he would gently help her move her legs, encouraging her to push herself a little further. It wasn't easy. Some days she wanted to give up, but his quiet confidence gave her strength. One morning, as Daniel supported her during practice, she managed to stand for the first time without assistance. Her legs trembled, but she stayed upright. "I'm doing it," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "I'm really doing it," Daniel smiled proudly. "Told you!" "You've got more fight in you than most people I know." She looked at him, emotion welling up in her chest. "I couldn't have done this without you." He shook his head. "You did it because you believed you could." That evening, while Daniel cooked dinner, Clara found herself watching him from the doorway. The way he hummed softly while stirring the pot, the way Lily wrapped her arms around his waist, it all looked like the life she never knew she wanted. A life filled with real love, not transactions or power. But then her phone buzzed again. Another message from Jason. This one was worse. "Clara, the board just held an emergency meeting. They're voting tomorrow. If you don't show up, you'll lose your position permanently." Her heart sank. She looked around the small kitchen, the warmth, the laughter, the peace, and then at her phone, glowing with the life she used to know. 2 worlds, 2 choices. Later that night, Daniel noticed her silence. "Everything okay?" he asked. Clara hesitated before nodding. "Just Business stuff. You miss it, don't you? She sighed. I don't know. I thought I would, but now I'm not so sure. That life feels hollow. Daniel studied her face. Maybe it's not the life you miss. It's the version of you that believed she needed it. His words hit deep. Clara looked away, afraid he might see the vulnerability in her eyes. I don't know who I am without it, he smiled softly. Maybe you're about to find out. The room fell quiet again, except for the gentle ticking of the wall clock. Clara didn't say it aloud, but she knew he was right. Somewhere between the accident and this tiny kitchen, she had started to change. And for the first time in her life, change didn't terrify her. That night, as she lay awake in the guest room, Clara thought about Daniel's kindness, the kind that didn't ask for anything in return. She thought about Lily's laughter, the smell of pancakes in the morning, the sound of birds outside the window. For a woman who once believed success was everything, she was starting to understand that real wealth looked nothing like money. It looked like moments, and as she drifted off to sleep, one thought stayed with her. Maybe fate hadn't broken her life that night. It had just rerouted it towards something more real. The next morning began quietly, with a soft grey sky and the scent of rain still lingering in the air. Clara sat by the living room window staring at her phone. The message from Jason glowed on the screen like a warning. They're voting today at noon. If you don't show up, it's over. Her heart pounded as she read it again and again. For years, that company had been her everything, her purpose, her proof that she could survive in a world that often tried to underestimate her. Yet now, as she sat in Daniel's small, cozy home, the thought of going back didn't bring comfort. It brought fear. Daniel entered the room carrying 2 mugs of coffee, his sleeves rolled up and hair still damp from his morning shower. You look deep in thought, he said softly, placing 1 mug beside her. Bad news. Clara forced a smile. Just work. The board's meeting today. They might remove me as CEO. Daniel leaned against the table, crossing his arms. And what would that mean? She sighed. It would mean losing everything I've built. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night. Gone. He studied her face for a long moment. And if they take it all away, what then? Would you still be you? She didn't answer right away. The question hung in the air like a whisper she didn't want to confront. Finally she said, I don't know anymore. He nodded slowly, then pulled out a chair beside her. Sometimes, when you've been running too long, stopping feels wrong, even when you're standing exactly where you should be. She looked at him, unsure how a man who had lost so much could still speak with such clarity. You make it sound so simple, he chuckled. It's not. I just learned the hard way that some things are worth keeping and others are worth letting go. The clock ticked closer to noon. Clara stared at it, knowing that with every passing minute, her position slipped further from reach. Daniel didn't say anything, just quietly sipped his coffee beside her. There was no pressure, no judgment, only presence. At exactly 12 o'clock, her phone buzzed again. A short message appeared from Jason. It's done. They voted you out. Her chest tightened, but no tears came. Instead, there was silence, a strange, calm silence she hadn't expected. Daniel watched her carefully, his voice gentle. I'm sorry, Clara shook her head slowly. No, don't be. Maybe this is what was supposed to happen. For the first time, she said it without breaking. The words left her lips like a release, freeing something heavy inside her. She wasn't the powerful CEO anymore. She wasn't the woman whose name made headlines or whose decisions moved millions. She was just Clara, human, wounded, and healing. That evening, Daniel suggested they take a walk. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening and cool. He helped her into her wheelchair, wrapping a soft blanket around her shoulders. As they moved down the quiet road, the sky began to clear, revealing streaks of pale blue between drifting clouds. Do you ever miss her? Clara asked quietly after a while. Daniel looked ahead, pushing her gently. Every day, he said. But missing her doesn't hurt like it used to. Now it just reminds me that I was lucky to have her at all. Clara nodded, her voice low. I don't think I've ever loved anyone like that. I thought I did once, but it was all about appearances, power. I was so afraid of being weak that I forgot how to be real. He stopped for a moment, kneeling beside her so their eyes met. "You're real now. Maybe that's the gift in all of this." Something in his tone made her chest tighten again, not from sadness, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. When they returned home, Lily was sitting at the table surrounded by paper and crayons. She looked up and beamed. Miss Clara. Look, I drew us at the park." Clara laughed softly. That's beautiful, Lily. You made my hair look so long." Lily giggled. "Daddy said you're really strong, so I made you a superhero cape too." Daniel smiled, watching the two of them. "Looks like someone sees you as a hero." Clara looked at Lily's drawing. 3 smiling figures under a big yellow sun, holding hands. For the first time, she felt seen not for what she had achieved, but for who she was becoming. Later that night, Clara sat outside on the porch, the cool breeze brushing her face. Daniel joined her with 2 cups of tea. "You've been quiet," he said softly. "I've been thinking," she replied. "All my life, I measured success by what I had. The company, the title, the respect. But now, none of that feels real anymore. It's like I was chasing shadows." He sipped his tea. "And what feels real now?" She turned to him, her eyes glistening. "This you, Lily, the sound of laughter in this house." "The peace," Daniel smiled gently. "Peace can be the hardest thing to earn." "You've done well." She looked down at her hands. "Do you think it's possible to start over? To build something new, not for power, but for purpose?" He nodded. "It's always possible, but it's not easy. It takes courage to build a life worth living, not the one people expect, but the one that makes you whole." For a moment, their eyes locked and the world felt still. The tension between them was quiet but undeniable. It wasn't about romance. It was about connection. The rare kind that happens when 2 broken people recognize each other's strength. Over the next few days, Clara began to help around the house more. She insisted on cooking, though Daniel had to step in more than once to save dinner from disaster. "You really weren't joking when you said you lived off takeout," he teased one evening as she tried to figure out the oven timer. She laughed. "In my defense, I used to have a chef for that." "Well," he said, handing her a wooden spoon, "welcome to the real world, CEO." She smiled at the title. It no longer stung the way it used to. It felt lighter, almost playful. Meanwhile, her legs were slowly gaining strength. Every day she walked a little further, leaning less on her crutches. Each step was painful, but every time she stumbled, Daniel was there, steady, patient, encouraging. Then one afternoon, while practicing in the backyard, she took a few unsteady steps on her own. Daniel turned from where he was fixing the fence and froze. "Clara, you're walking." Her face lit up and tears welled in her eyes. "I'm walking," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Daniel dropped his tools and rushed over, catching her just as her balance faltered. They both laughed through their tears, the kind of laughter that comes from relief and gratitude all at once. When she finally sat down, she looked at him, her voice soft. "You changed everything for me, Daniel. You didn't just help me heal, you reminded me how to live." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You did that yourself. I just walked beside you." That night, after Lily was asleep, they sat on the couch together, watching the fire crackle in the small fireplace. Neither spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Clara turned to him at last. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just a stranger, but now I think maybe you were exactly who I was meant to find." Daniel looked at her, his eyes reflecting the glow of the fire. "And maybe you were meant to find yourself here." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain again. Inside, warmth filled the room. Not just from the fire, but from something deeper. For the first time in a long while, Clara wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She was thinking about what she had found. A home, a friend, a new beginning. And perhaps, in the quiet corners of her heart, something even more. The days that followed were filled with a quiet kind of magic. The kind that happens not in grand gestures, but in the small, unnoticed moments that shape a life. Clara was walking again, slowly but steadily, her strength returning with each sunrise. What once felt impossible now felt natural. The woman who once lived in glass towers and spoke only in boardroom tones was now learning how to breathe, how to live simply, how to smile without rehearsing it first. Daniel's home had become a refuge, a world far removed from the chaos she used to know. Every morning, the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Lily would run into her room with a drawing or a flower she'd picked from the garden, insisting that Clara keep it as a lucky charm. Daniel, always steady, always kind, would greet her with that same soft smile, the one that somehow managed to say everything without a single word. One morning, as Clara practiced walking down the hallway, Daniel stood nearby, pretending not to watch. She moved carefully, one step at a time, holding the edge of the wall for balance. "You're doing great," he said quietly. She laughed breathlessly. "You say that every time, even when I almost fall." "Because every step matters," he replied. "Falling just means you're trying." His words made her pause. They weren't just about walking, she realized. They were about her life, her mistakes, her fears. Daniel had a way of seeing through her walls, gently but completely. Later that day, she sat with Lily on the porch, helping her color a picture book. The little girl chattered endlessly about school, friends, and her plans to bake cookies for the weekend. Clara listened, smiling at the innocence in her voice. For a woman who had built her empire on control and perfection, this simple moment, crayons, laughter, sunlight, felt more valuable than anything she'd ever owned. When Daniel joined them, Lily jumped up and ran to him. "Daddy, Miss Clara says she'll help me make cookies." Daniel grinned. "Oh no, not my kitchen again," Clara smirked. "You should have seen it yesterday. We only burned 2 batches," he chuckled. Progress. As they all laughed together, Clara caught herself thinking about something she hadn't dared to before. What it would be like to stay. To make this her life, not just a temporary chapter. But the thought scared her as much as it comforted her, because staying meant admitting she wanted to, and wanting to meant risking her heart again. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Daniel and Clara sat outside watching the fading light. The world seemed quiet, peaceful. "You've been different lately," Daniel said, his tone thoughtful. "How so?" she asked. He took a sip of his tea. "You smile more. You talk less about the company. You seem lighter." She nodded, staring at the horizon. "It's strange. For years I believed that power was everything, that success was the only thing keeping me from disappearing. But here, none of that matters. It's terrifying, but it's freeing too." Daniel smiled faintly. "Sounds like you're finally meeting yourself." She glanced at him, her voice soft. What if I don't like who I find?" "Then you keep learning," he said. "That's what life is. You don't stop because it hurts. You keep going until you can look in the mirror and see peace instead of pain." His words lingered in her mind long after the conversation ended. That night, as she lay awake, she thought about all she had lost, her company, her old identity, the world she'd built, and all she had gained: compassion, strength, connection, love, though she wasn't ready to call it that yet. The next morning, she woke early to the sound of rain tapping against the window. Daniel was already up, fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen. She stood at the doorway, watching him quietly, a soft smile on her lips. "You know," she said, "you make hard things look easy." He looked up with a grin. "That's because I've had a lot of practice. Do you ever wish you could change your life?" she asked. He paused, thinking. "Sometimes. But then I remember. Everything that's hard also brought me something good. I wouldn't trade that." She nodded slowly. "Maybe that's the difference between us. I've always tried to escape the hard parts." He put down the wrench and looked at her seriously. "Maybe that's why they kept chasing you." It was a simple sentence, but it hit her like a revelation. For years she had been running, from loss, from loneliness, from herself. But now, sitting in this small house with a man who fixed broken things and a child who loved without condition, she realized that some things weren't meant to be escaped. They were meant to be faced. Days turned into weeks, and soon Clara was walking without support. Every step still hurt, but she no longer feared the pain. She had learned to see it as proof that she was alive, that she was healing. One afternoon, Daniel surprised her by driving to the place where everything had begun, the hill where her car had crashed. The rain had washed away the wreck, leaving only the curve of the road and the quiet sound of wind through the trees. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked softly. "Because you've been afraid to face it," he said. "And because I think it's time." She swallowed hard, staring at the spot that had once nearly ended her life. Her hands trembled slightly. "I thought that night broke me." Daniel shook his head. "It didn't break you. It introduced you to a part of yourself you hadn't met yet." Tears welled in her eyes. She turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what if I'm not ready to say goodbye to this version of my life? To you and Lily?" He looked at her gently, his eyes soft but steady. "Then don't say goodbye. Just say see you soon." It was the kind of answer only Daniel could give. Simple, true and full of quiet faith. When they returned home, Clara felt different, lighter, as if she had finally closed a chapter that had been open for far too long. She spent the rest of the evening helping Lily with homework and laughing at Daniel's terrible attempt to make spaghetti. Later that night, as she packed her few belongings into a small suitcase, she felt a strange ache in her chest. She wasn't leaving because she wanted to. She was leaving because she needed to. It was time to rebuild her life. But now she would do it differently. With heart, not pride, Daniel stood in the doorway watching her quietly. "So this is it," he said softly. "For now," she replied, her voice trembling just a little. "I need to see what's next," he nodded. "You'll do great. Just promise me one thing. Don't forget what you found here." She smiled faintly. "I could never forget." The next morning, Lily ran into her arms, hugging her tightly. "You'll come back, right?" Clara knelt, brushing the child's hair gently. "I will. I promise." As she drove away, the small house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, but her heart felt fuller than it ever had before. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running away. She was walking towards something. Weeks later, Clara stood in her old office building. Now as a consultant rather than a CEO, she had chosen not to fight the board, not to claw her way back to power. Instead, she started a foundation, one that provided medical aid and rehabilitation for accident victims who couldn't afford it. Her first donation came from her own savings, and she named the program after a little girl who once gave her courage, the Lily Project. Months passed. Her life had changed completely, but her heart remained tied to the small town, to the man who had taught her that kindness could rebuild what ambition had destroyed. One evening, as she returned home from a charity event, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Daniel. "Lily says she misses her superhero. We're baking cookies this weekend if you're free." She smiled, tears filling her eyes. Her fingers trembled as she typed back, "Tell her her favorite helper is on her way." That weekend, when she pulled up outside Daniel's house, Lily ran out the door shouting, "You came back!" Daniel stood behind her, smiling that same calm, steady smile. Clara stepped forward, her voice soft but sure. "I told you I would." In that moment, as laughter filled the air and the world seemed perfectly still, Clara knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not at the top of the world, but right in the heart of it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional tales that remind us of the power of kindness and humanity. Tell us in the comments about a moment when someone's compassion changed your life. Your story might inspire someone to do good today. Stay tuned for more heartfelt stories that restore faith in people and prove that love and empathy still exist in this world.